it's opened us up to a whole new audience. I was at a Regions and Nations event this morning, which went from Australia to South America, to Scotland, to Wales, to Ireland. So without further ado, I'm going to ask if our chairman is here. I'll hand over to Deb. If not, I'll introduce the speaker directly.
Hi, Tony. I have joined.
Deb, I'll hand over to you now. Thanks, Deb.
Thank you very much. And good afternoon, everyone. I think, thank you, Tony, for giving the introduction. It is like one of those things. Tony has very kindly outlined what we are going to cover. And this is very new to us. But at the same time, I would start this whole thing with 3 thank yous. The first thank you is to our speakers for finding time to give this their time and their expertise for us. And it is open for everyone, for all the academicians to come. And that's why we have made it a academicians only lunch hour. And please, by all means, get in touch with us and get involved in it. The second thank you is to Stephen, Linda, Olga, Delano, and Rachel, who are behind the scenes. And they have done incredibly well in actually moving the whole thing to a digital. The third thank you is to every one of you to just make time for it. And I've been told that we had a full sellout session for this one. The final figures were 96 or 100. So without further ado, I think we have an excellent line of speakers. We have only 2, but before that, I would like to give a bit of a terms of engagement, how we are going to run this. All your video and microphone should be in mute. There is a chat channel where I think any questions that you want to raise, please do so. We have 2 questions already before we are starting. So that has been very helpful. So everybody who has contributed, thank you for that. And I will start by introducing Nick. In terms of the presentation, we will have first Nick going through this presentation, and then we will have Jaan. And at the end, please wait for a couple of minutes, because we have some exciting news of how we are going to do some few future events, and we would like to share the calendar of events with you. So Nick, everybody in Academy knows Nick for a very long time. And
you flatter me.
Hi, Nick. Let me just say a couple of things about Nick. I mean, personally, and as all academicians, all of us know Nick for a very long time. He's an economist, urbanist, and a strategic planner. He founded URBED in 1976 to devise practical solutions to regeneration of urban areas. So particularly for this topic, and he has been doing work on the town centers for a very, very long time. And he has co-produced vital and viable town centers long back in 1970s, which formed to support the government's new policy on retailing and many subsequent good practices. So Nick, over to you. So if you can share your screen and go through the presentation, and we'll take some questions as
yes.
well.
Okay. Due to some technical difficulties, you're going to see the slides thanks to Stephen. And I should make a little correction, which is that I actually did vital and viable town centers back in 1985. But I think the framework is still as valid as ever. And I'm going to use it to run through a call for action, which is summarized in the article I've just done for the latest journal, which tries to show some practical things that could be done in all our town centers, and which I would like to think academicians might initiate. Apologies for publicizing our latest report, which has literally just gone up on our website for the URBED Trust a couple of minutes ago. But you'll see that it's highly relevant, because if we are to deal with the tragedy or challenge of what's happening to our town centers, we're going to be very smart indeed. Next. So the first idea is that we need to get smart. We need to use all our knowledge if we're going to enable our town centers to recover. I believe the threat to our town centers is actually greater than the epidemic itself. The reasons being that I think many small enterprises will never reopen. The risks are too great, the costs are too high, the rewards too low. The big organizations have already finding that they can function through deliveries, they can function, make the most of the internet. So they're not going to invest, and most of the buildings are now owned by absentee managers. So we have the very things that we prize, the heart of our communities, could be dead in a very large number of places, or there'll be so much vacancy as to make it unappealing to go back into our streets when they reopen. So I think we need to treat it a bit like a war. In wars, you have strategies and you set up task forces. And it's worth remembering that in the Second World War, the Beveridge report was issued in 1942. In other words, we didn't wait till the end of the war before having a plan for recovery. I think we need to do something similar rather than doing the typical British thing of waiting to see all the results, setting up a commission or report, and by the time any thing is being considered, the patient has died. So what do we mean by getting smart? Well, the first thing is to look at the catchment area. This is London, a report we did for GLA. And by simply mapping the catchment areas, the pedestrian pedshed around each of the town centres, focusing on those with transport links, we were able to highlight the immediate catchment areas, also to show the areas that have been developed more recently, which is the right-hand image. And we now have the strength of GIS, Geographical Information Systems, to be able to set priorities, because a huge range of data is available that can be superimposed and used to reach agreement much more quickly than we normally do. And this would include identifying disadvantaged areas where poorer people live and the areas which are most cut off, and then highlighting clusters. And I'll come back to that. But essentially, we have to build on strengths and find areas where we have a critical mass of activity to draw people in again. Next. So access is fundamental. And I love this cartoon. I'll read it. It says, left of the charity shop, past the charity shop, second right after the charity shop. And it makes the point that many of our town centres are becoming very similar. The term clone town was sometimes used because they've lost all the bright lights, if you like, the things that draw people to stop. So I don't think that means just encouraging everyone to get in their cars and drive out of town. We actually have to prioritize active travel, walking and cycling. And of course, the very effects of this awful virus has been to encourage us to do the very opposite, to distance ourselves from other people. So we're learning behavior, which is completely opposite to what's needed to cope with the coming climate or climate crisis, which is already on us, which means not eliminating the cars, but taming cars, treating them a bit like wild beasts and making sure they keep their place and certainly don't dominate high streets. And that also applies to buses. We have to calm our buses and integrate public transport, which means being able to move easily from one mode to another, as you will able to do in continental cities and a few British ones. And perhaps the most radical thing of all is we have to charge for out-of-town parking, and we have to make parking within towns much easier and cheaper. So, for example, free after 3, as it is in the town where we live, which is Stroud. Next. The attractions are fundamental, but I'm suggesting that this is the order in which one does things. So you've got to make it easier to get in, but then we need to redevelop peripheral premises, a lot of failing retail parks and so on, and often some small underutilized car parks as homes. There's something absurd in people driving all the way around town to get somewhere to park. They should park in centers on the edge, quite possibly multi-story car parks, because those will be cheaper than going out of town. And we need to support workplaces and community hubs, which means taking over key empty buildings. And this is a classic example which we saw in Eindhoven. You remember that one ward, and we visited it for our conference, and Housing Association took over the old Philips buildings and turned them into studios and housing. Now, Eindhoven had the misfortune of both Philips and DAP closing within a couple of weeks of each other. So it lost its main employers, but it's recovered its role as a center for design within the Netherlands. So it just shows what's possible if everyone works together. And by the way, the local authorities in Eindhoven collaborated with the adjoining towns and cities in what they call the triple helix. And I think that provides an inspiration for what we have to do in the next few years. Next. people won't just go in because there are shops or things to do. They want a town that feels special. We talk about the buzz, and that means you not so much thinking about the whole town now, but thinking of special places within the town or on the edge of the town. So if we do the kind of mapping I'm proposing, we would be identifying clusters of shops and waterfronts, the canal where perhaps they're just dead dogs or whatever, but can be come back to life as an attractive place to visit in many, many towns, as is starting to happen in Stroud. Festivals and campaigns are obvious ways of celebrating places which might have been forgotten. And the article, when it appears in the journal, will show Morris dancers in Stroud. You can hardly move from Morris dancers many Saturdays in the year in Stroud. Environmental upgrades, of course, but let us not think that just putting lipstick on a gorilla or on a corpse will bring it back to life. We have to do something more fundamental. What I'm showing, this image, shows Nyhavn, which is at the end of the mile of pedestrianized streets, which Jan Gehl introduced into Copenhagen. And it's a wonderful place to live to eat and drink outside the harbor. And my suggestion, as we won't be able to get enough people into our restaurants and cafes to make them viable if they've all got to be a long way apart, is of course we have to use the space outside. We have to use the pavements. And where the pavements are narrow, we have to put people back in the streets. So in other words, we have to reclaim the streets, for example, by using cones or tape initially, and then doing a more fundamental job afterwards. You'll see I'm an exponent of just do it, which is Wolf Daeseking's great phrase from Freiburg. So sometimes we need to just experiment and then see whether they work, rather than have very long drawn out studies. And all this is about reigniting civic pride. It's making people feel proud of where they live and where they shop and where they work. And that wasn't very strong even before the epidemic, but maybe the very process of seeing that we do belong to the same nation will mean that we can also do the same with regard to our town centers. Next. Finally, and most important, and I hope I haven't used up all my 10 minutes yet. Who's keeping an eye on it? Stephen?
We are keeping an eye. It's okay, Nick.
Okay. Well, the final and most fundamental thing is organizing and resourcing initiatives. And I'm afraid we're very good at doing studies and measuring things and providing evidence, and not very good at actually making things happen. And that means re-empowering local authorities and partnerships. And they need money. So that means we have to recast parking charges. It's no good expecting to get the same income out of parking when parking often needs to be free or reduced, short-term parking free, which means we've got to change our property tax system. Those of you who are nerds like myself, economists, will perhaps have taken an interest in the idea of land value capture, which I've written quite a lot on as a pamphlet you can get hold of on sharing the benefit of land value uplift. But that also means not just getting money from developers, but it means getting existing property owners to pay more, particularly the wealthy residents who live around our towns, in villages and so on. So we've got to bite the bullet and accept that more money is going to be needed that can come from central government, and we have to raise that locally. And that means rethinking what town centres are for, so that we see them not just as places to shop and disposable, if you like, but places that are actually the heart of our communities and our commonwealth. And you could see this in Eindhoven, and this is, of course, the group from Eindhoven visiting it and enjoying it, what makes it special. So we need partnerships, of course, and above all, a lot of pilot projects. Some won't work, but let's at least try things out. And then share the lessons. Let's monitor them through beacon councils. This was the term used for councils that sought to show the way forward. And we did a report for them, oh God, back in 2000, I think. So enough is known. In my article, I referred to many reports we've done, but I could have referred to hundreds more. In fact, you need a tool shed for all the toolkits. So finally, let's once again with the slide that I introduced it, I think, no? Yes, smart cities. So let us capitalize on the digital revolution. Let's not see it defeat us where all our goods and services are supplied online, but let's see the value of human contact, because the really smart city is the city that's fun to be in. And this is where urbanists could play a leading role in taking part in task forces or getting task forces going. I've already been trying to get these ideas shared through historic towns and in Oxford, where I've been working. And I do hope it will be taken up much more widely, and that the academicians might be the people who lead the assault. And let's hope they return to tell the tale. Thank you.
Thank you, Nick. We have some good kind of a busy chat going along. So Nick has also prepared a paper which was sent alongside the presentation as a part of the preemptive, if you like, to get a bit of understanding of his thinking that he very kindly organized. What I will do is that we have around 10 minutes, and I think we are trying something here. We might not be able to call everyone on the call to ask the question directly to Nick. But if I may, I think I'll go through the questions in a bit. I would like to request Richard to come and just ask about the parking issue. And the question is for you, Nick. Richard, are you online? Can you come? I'll ask the question for you. Nick, basically, Richard is asking, did he misheard, or did Nick suggest a free and cheap parking in the town centers in the afternoon, and the charge for out-of-town parking? And the answer is yes. In your paper, you say that. But do you want to add anything more?
Okay, let me add a few things. This was an idea that we implemented in Stroud, and it's really had an impact. If you go into any town, you'll find that mums pick up their kids from school in the afternoon. And my thought was, well, when they're picking up their kids, why don't we encourage them to do some shopping as well? The car parks, certainly in Stroud, were quite empty after 3 o'clock. So the council simply made the car parks free after 3. And I think that's a nice little slogan. So we have to do some things to make it just easier and cheaper. It's not just the cost of parking, it's also finding the money and fiddling around and so on. So let's make it easy to park, but park short term. It doesn't mean to say, as some right-wing thinkers might argue, that we should have a free-for-all, because we have to manage what is a limited space. So we do need controlled parking zones in the residential areas and around a town centre. And again, that's a very straightforward thing to do. We could be much cleverer and look to places like Singapore to see how to really do things where Jaan is at the moment. But I'll leave that to him. But let's at least start with doing things which are straightforward and which make people believe again in their town and try them out.
I think just a couple of other comments just for everybody's benefit, which Steve has very kindly said that although pandemic might be in trim one, it might be the climate change and the issues related to a wider urbanism. Sustainable urbanism is much more important, and we need to actually look as a wider whole. And if you would have seen, I think there was a very a recent article, actually today, David Rudlin's article, and if you would have seen it on BD Online, he mentions something about, actually I can see David is just writing something right now. So yes, I think generally, David, do you want to come and say something about that on the industrial towns?
Am I unmuted? Yes.
Yes, please, go ahead.
We're all muted, I think.
We can hear you.
Can you hear me? Okay, sorry, I thought we were all muted. The piece in BD says that, yeah, there's lots of people at the moment saying this crisis should help us tackle this and that and so on. And the answer I was trying to make in the article is that it's going to be just as difficult to deal with those issues after the crisis as it is at the moment. So the point I made, the question I asked to Nick was about a lot of the solutions that you have, which are very compelling if we're talking about a city like Eindhoven or a larger city or town in the UK, or even quite an affluent, smaller place. But what about the left behind towns? What about the industrial towns, which a lot of the retailers are saying they're not going to reopen their stores in those mid-sized centres because they're going to concentrate on the bigger centres? How do we deal with them?
Yes. Well, one of my arguments is that in the towns which have a relatively wealthy catchment area, such as in the south of England, where most of the market towns are to be found, we have to find ways of tapping the resources, the financial resources of their residents, to free up public money to put into the so-called left behind towns. I've always been astonished, even in places that people might think of as depressed, like Barnsley, or we worked in Grimethorpe, that there is still a spirit of interest amongst people in that town. In Grimethorpe, it was the young people who wanted to take over the old Miners' Institute. So it seems to me, if we can start with finding groups of people who want to do something positive, not just burn places down or have riots, then that's one thing to build on in all industrial towns. Certainly heritage is important, and it's key to get buildings which have some historic interest conserved and reused. It may not be viable to bring them back into use as housing, but certainly I think using the ground floors for showrooms, temporary studios and so on, anything that can be done relatively quickly and can make an impact, it should be done. As I said earlier, David, I feel that we cannot do everything at once, and so it is sensible to have fronts, rather, as in the war. We didn't open up the third front, as I think Stalin wanted, though we rather mistakenly tried to invade Italy from the bottom and got snarled up there. So I think mapping, and this is where academicians should be able to score, we can see the best places to start the onslaught. And I think we have to be very careful of avoiding what seem like simplistic solutions in Wolverhampton, where the town centre seems totally dead. They were talking about completely pedestrianising, absolutely mad. In many places, we have to reintroduce cars to allow people to see the pleasures, whatever there is in the town. But we have to make sure the speed never goes above 15 miles an hour, which means if you do hit somebody, you only damage them, you don't kill them.
Nick, I will go through a few comments, and you can take a couple of them together. So there was a good point about what is the role of bids going forward in the town centre.
Role of what?
Bids. It is the business improvement districts.
Oh yes, yeah.
Yeah, so that is one point. The other one, this is Stefano who has made the point. Sorry, Stefano, I mean, because we have a time limit, I think I can't bring everybody on but I'm just for everybody's benefit and for Nick's benefit. And there was another question about Angela's, who had already, we have answered to a certain point about the social distancing and how, the question she is asking is that shouldn't all premises on High Street use to face-to-face social interaction and economic transactions be how they will cope with it, the short and the immediate one. Biljana makes a good point about Eindhoven, which you have covered in your presentation. Hank makes a good point about the phenomena of shops and how it remained for maximum of 100 years. And should we start thinking about different uses for the shop? And Heather makes a good point about, shall we have some more design for fun in the town centers? So few points if you can take, and then we will take Jaan's presentation.
Very good, very rapidly. When we originally proposed the idea of business improvement districts taken from the States, we pointed out that in the States, the payment comes from the owners of the property, not from the poor retailers. And I believe we need to reintroduce that idea that it's the owners who should be, who have the longest or biggest stake in towns, who need to be brought into plans for recovery. I think that social enterprises have a hugely important role to play. Of course, that's exactly what charity shops are. And I think that it's very important that local authorities are making sure that all sorts of things have just space to use town center windows to promote whatever cause they're interested in. And that means that local authorities have to be able to mobilize the empty buildings, not just wring their hands because they're not getting any income and their costs are going up, but actually be able to target empty and underutilized property and use compulsory purchase orders. The business about transactions, I think that it's crucial that we get close to people again, and so that we could see their eyes. We can, and I can see that masks could be completely counterproductive. So, though I think the crisis has shown the ability of people to unite around a common cause, and Jared Diamond, who wrote Guns, Germs, and Steel, when asked on television about whether he was pessimistic about the future, said he was now much more optimistic about us tackling climate change because of the way we had behaved. But at the same time, we've got to realize that a lot of that behavior is counterproductive. So let us have sort of safe areas within towns where people aren't all dressed up in masks and so on. Let us remember the idea of kindness and so on. Can I, one final thing, give you a quote from Piketty. I hope you're all reading books and I've just finished Piketty's second great tome. And on page 1034, so very close to the end, he says this: change comes when the short-term logic of events intersects with the long-term evolution of ideas. But I think ideas about seeing ourselves as one planet or whatever have been around for a long time. So, and the climate change crisis and so on and so forth. But we now have a short-term logic of events. And it seems to me, once again, in the words of Emmanuel Ram, we should never let a good crisis go to waste. So let's, for God's sake, make the most of this to do things differently rather than more business as usual. Thank you.
Thank you, Nick. That is very, very positive. And just to add, I have not been able to take all the questions, but just to highlight, there are some updates if you can follow. There was a follow-up answer by Stefano regarding Aberdeen looking for crowdfunding opportunities. And the point about when Nick was mentioning about how do we talk about the culture, Andrew made a couple of good points about culture as a driver, and the role of culture feels like a key driver, but we need to think streets and places. So moving on very quickly, I think we are still on time, and Nick, it has been always a pleasure to hear Nick, that is Henk is saying. One point, so let me introduce our second speaker, and Jaan. Jaan is a human-centered design strategist at a partner in Manyone Asia in Singapore. He creates services, spaces, and tools, and improve how we live life in urban centers. So, and he brings a lot of different ideas together from different methods and a wide range of industries in his work to explore and experiment, to challenge as well as validate established truths. So without further ado, if I just pass on the presenter to Jaan, please go ahead, Jaan.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Deb, and thank you for having me today. I'm just going to switch over to the presentation and off we go. There we go. Hopefully there is a screen on your screens now.
Yeah.
Excellent. So yes, as Deb mentioned, we're called Manyone Asia. We're a firm that works with design in many areas. We're all across Europe, but the part that I'm involved in is in Singapore and Hong Kong. Our background is quite important to sort of what we do now. We have this very strong digital and product design background. Always human-centered, but sort of slowly over a number of years, we started moving into building things for what we then call the real world. And it was quite liberating, actually. The whole idea of figuring out what does it actually mean to be on time? What does it actually mean to live in an urban setting? And designing for that rather than purely digital or very abstract ways. And of course, we hadn't only done, and we still sort of don't only sort of go back to that. Today it is more of a combination, but we've done a lot of design fiction work, for example, for the city of Stockholm. We'd worked with adaptive urban wayfinding, so the signs that sort of figure out what's going on and point you in the right direction. We've even designed a car and the whole ecosystem around it that focuses on sustainability and electrical vehicle as a way of enabling movement. But regardless of what we were working on, really, there was this one thing that just struck us, and that is that we always felt that we wanted to hear from more people. We kept sort of being the annoying ones who were sort of jumping up and down at the back and raising our hand and going, but could we also hear from this group? Or how did you go about this? How many people were involved? So we also wanted to really share what we thought were interesting starting points. We really essentially just wanted to have a very clear dialogue when we were doing research, especially in urban settings. And here's a very good example. In Singapore, it's not necessarily just about new walking paths. It's about the great work opportunities that shade brings. If you're in a subtropic climate, it's incredibly important that, yes, you can move about, but it's also incredibly important that you can move about in a way that doesn't actually fry you to a crisp. So when we talk about infrastructure, infrastructure is very, very close to quite natural occurrences. Shade, essentially that whole sort of human nature interface. So yes, but 6-7 years ago, where do we start? That was sort of the question we were looking at. And we knew, and I think Angela mentioned this last week as well, how younger generations usually wouldn't attend town halls or anything like that, and maybe the slightly older generation were less inclined towards using technology. And for us, it turned out it was quite obvious, and it still is, prototyping. Essentially, any type of community-informed research and prototyping is less about asking, less about the interviews, and more about involving people in the doing and the experiencing of what we're working on. And we've had this idea that we'd rather learn 2 things now than 20 things in the future. And that's how we've decided to work. It worked fantastically in sort of the digital realm. And we also slowly found that this very focused, some call it limited, but for us, focused, hands-on approach actually attracted pretty much all generations. It didn't really matter, not only age, but what your socioeconomic background or your experience in these things were. Everyone sort of came on board. And the question is, well, why? Prototyping really is about common sense. It's designing with common sense. If you actually have to create something and hold it in your hands and see how it works, you will do really smart things. And of course, prototyping can also be very, very playful, which lowers barriers. And we always believe that play is a hugely important part of any very, very serious topic. And as you are creators as well, all of you, you know that in any project, we always kind of want to understand really what is the need, what is the expectation, and also what is the ability, not only to create it, but then use it once it's been realized. Well, and here's a fantastic thing. With this very community informed way of prototyping, there is no way you can misinterpret, for example, expectation when you're co-creating a library for a university with a very diverse and outspoken student and faculty. And the whole idea of needs, it is crystal clear when you hear from a frustrated 3-year-old and maybe an 83-year-old, like you realize that every single bench that's non-transactional have been removed along a shopping street. That is sort of that very direct and very clear input that we're looking for. And we're noticing also that any work that is looking sort of post-COVID-19 world, this level of involvement and clarity and speed will be very, very welcome. So I wanted to show you a little bit what this might look like and what's looked like over the years. Sometimes it's obviously incredibly low tech. The image on the left there, that's a bunch of blue tape and items of clothing on the floor to essentially figure out how we might welcome people into a certain type of space. The one on the right, this is, I mentioned now for the second time, benches. I love benches. This is the only non-transactional bench you can find in Marylebone in central London that's not in a park. It happens to be outside one of the Academy's media partners, Monocle's shop, but that's not really intentional. But then figuring out where would people put these benches if they had a chance to do that. It is a lovely thing to walk up to someone on the high street with a bench in hand and say, hi, where would you like to put this bench? That is very hands-on prototyping. You get very strange looks as well, but that's okay. Having that playful aspect is something that I'm sure many of you recognize and champion as well. What we've always wanted to do is to make sure that there's no limitations on people's own abilities. Whether you have full functionality of your body, whether you have, whether you're very young, whether you've not done this type of work before, whether you have time, whether you don't want to have time, we always make sure that we have a way of involving everyone. I want to show something else that's actually very much work in progress. So you get to see my hand-drawn sketches. As you can tell, I'm certainly not a visual designer. But this is something we're looking at right now, actually, which is how might we bring local high streets and shops back to life as restrictions are easing in different parts of the world. And this one actually started identifying some 20 points of action or items that we could affect in a streetscape that can be updated with essentially little or very, very, very few approval steps in an approval process with tiny budgets, 100 euros, 10,000 euros tops. So some of the things that came out of this was for stores and for stores to have their phone numbers or their WhatsApp IDs in huge type sizes on their windows, benches outside or nearby where people can wait and the staff brings their purchases out. So it's a little bit like ordering online and being at home. Yeah, it's the complete opposite. It's in your community, but it sort of uses that same simplicity and also, to be frank, the safety aspect of it. Libraries putting more return boxes outside. And in some instances, the whole idea of using signage. One street that we were looking at, there's a huge, massive information sign outside the local cinema. We're going to do some testing using that to actually inform about what else is going on the street, which shops are closed, who's open, and all of that. So you don't always need to go into the middle of things to see what's available. This is a picture from Stockholm, just around the corner from our Stockholm studio. And we might be going slightly crazy here, I think, possibly. The idea of sort of summer streets, which is a very big thing in the city of Stockholm and elsewhere in the world as well. Essentially, we close the streets off to cars and other traffic during the summers and sort of bring out benches and all. That is all good, but we decided that we want to take this one step further. It's good that businesses can be involved and they don't have to have transactional seating, transactional activities outside like this shop has done. But we actually wanted to really take this experience that we have, all this work that we've done so far, and just go all in, extra everything on absolutely everything. So if all goes well, later in the summer, we are going to bring in all of the things that you see on the screen to either this street or one of the side streets. And for 6 hours, we are going to have residents and the local business owners essentially craft the types of spaces, places, extensions, etc., that they want. This is also part of another thing that we believe very, very strongly in, and that is that whenever something like this happens, you really need to obviously bring in the local stakeholders, City Hall, etc., to not necessarily interact always, but just to see how these things come about, that iterative process. There's a lot of power in seeing that, and also understanding that something doesn't have to be finished. It doesn't have to be there forever. This is a 6-hour project. It's going to be gone before you know it, but a lot of things will be learned from that for a short period of time. And what we're going to look at, which often gets missed, at least in the context of Stockholm, is that it's not only about generations. It is also about time of day, and especially for children. When you go to school, when you come home from school, what you do after school, what you do on the weekends, are very, very often incredibly different things. So we want to capture that. So after tons of missteps over a number of years, and successes, luckily, we've really started seeing ourselves more and more as enablers to offer up this way, or a way to play even, for a community to arrive at a common goal. And of course, one of the main reasons there's just to sort of stop the infighting. Opinions are amazing. If they clash, they don't really lead anywhere, but if they can work with each other, they go somewhere. And we have this opportunity as a fairly well-known agency, as people who have the opportunity to speak for more individuals, to actually bring these results in front of decision makers. We enable that to happen. And also to sort of force a bit of change. With the slightly crazy idea there of the street where we want to run the 6-hour project, well, the decision makers in City Hall, they will see that what they see there is the application. This is the community input. It's not filling out the forms. It's not doing the administration. They can help out with that because the community has done their bit. And of course, just finding more ways for people to use the power of design and prototyping in any setting to communicate, to learn a bit more. So we're talking about, we wanted to hear from more people. We wanted to involve more people. And yeah, we did. We were very happy with that. And this is a lovely quote that we got from one of our projects. And it is enough to feel and want and have ideas, but very, very often it's so easy to overlook the proof points. And through a lot of the prototyping projects that we've involved, or essentially we've followed the lead of the communities, we've managed to do that as well. So we're very, very happy about that. Thank you for this. Please do get in touch, and as it says up in the right-hand corner, do get involved with the Academy. This is a fantastic opportunity to really contribute, share. Next time and the weeks after, I'm sure that a lot of you will be doing the presentations instead, and I really look forward to that. So thank you.
Thank you, Jaan.
Back to you.
No, that's brilliant. Thank you for taking us through the journey that you have gone through. And I think there are quite a lot of positive things. I think David mentions love the 6-hour project. Angela talks great about how we can talk about tactical urbanism. There's some great manuals I think we need to refer to. And a lot of points. I think what has happened is, if you think what Nick started with from his presentation about this 5 A's, about action, access, attractions, amenity, and agency, I think you have extended it to what you call enable, enable, and enable through a need, through expectations and ability. So in theory, I think we have come the whole circle talking about all the cultural issues and everything related to it. I would like to bring a few people on the call. I think one of the things we had missed is, and he had already started talking about experiences of the place. And if I may, Nick, can you come online? Nick Taylor? Hi, Nick. You okay? We can't hear you, Nick.
Sorry about that.
Please go ahead.
We're fighting over the mute button. Thank you for that. Yes, this is hugely interesting and very relevant to what I'm doing right now. I'm working in Kendal, up in the Lake District at the moment, and we're looking to do a great deal of all of the things we've talked about that Nicholas mentioned there, that Jaan just mentioned as well, which was really, really relevant to what we're on with. The one bit as a former hotelier, The bit that I think we could also throw into the pot is the actual experience of going into the town centre. And a large part of work we did many years ago in Scarborough was a borough-wide training program for all the boys and girls at the front edge of the process. So we ran a program of training sessions for all frontline staff about a little along the lines of video arts of what John Cleese used to do, if you remember those spectacular videos of his about how to do things and how to not do things. And it was a very useful process. We then ran that with an award program, which we got sponsored by various suppliers into various businesses. And it was a rather useful tool because what it was about just improving the quality of the experience of the fish and chip shop owner while he was encouraging him to have his staff have a good wash before they come to work and smile at the customers. And it gained a great deal of favour and a great deal of progress for the town. But I think so those are easy and cheap things to do because one doesn't need large investment from the local authority. The big thing we do though need to do is try and encourage with the planning departments about subtle things such as tables and chairs going outside shops, the benches that John was just talking about now. I was involved in a program of installing benches many years ago, and it was a right song and dance, to be honest with you. We got it done in the end, and it worked a treat. But you can make a lovely thing out of having the right benches in the right places and create a very, very pleasant atmosphere in a town centre. So I'm certainly up for that. But also the introduction of chairs and tables in the right places, again, makes a massive difference. It's happened all over the UK, following on from European examples, and it's worked well. It's also a matter of getting planning on side, though, the local planning department, because they hold their hands up in the air in horror with this, because the retail community are not really, although they think they're on side, they're not on side. All they want is lots of people directed to their front door. Getting involved in this sort of thing for retailers is something that's an anathema to them. So it's working with local communities and other users of the areas, at festivals, event managers, and all that sort of stuff, pulling those people together to start making that big difference. It's a very exciting area, and right now we're at exactly the right time to be talking about this, because as mentioned by colleagues earlier, there are going to be quite a few voids in these town centres as we come out of this coronavirus process. So it's going to be interesting times, and we're ideally suited to influence it.
Thank you, Nick. I think what I will do is that looking at the kind of a timing, I'll just try to take few questions very quickly, and I think I'll try to bring Heather in the discussion, but from the general points that is coming from the chat and just for everyone, I think what has come through is it is time to act, but also with a bit of a kind of a long-term strategy in mind in how things might actually come together. And Heather, are you online? Can you come and just...
Yes, can you hear me? Yes.
Yes, thank you, Heather.
Really enjoyed that presentation, and really, I completely agree that, the process of getting people involved in designing a place is really, really important. I just wondered if there had been any example of where you'd gone through a process of prototyping with lots of different people, and actually the main client, or if it's an authority, had ignored that, and whether or not that eroded the process, and how did you manage that? Because I think, we talk about authorities being a kind of single voice, but actually we know that lots of different departments have different remits, and quite often there's internal clashes, and I kind of agree that putting a bench in place seems the most simple thing, but actually quite often it's really, really difficult. So just some thoughts on where things had gone wrong.
Oh, they have gone wrong many, many times, or rather they've not gone fully according to plan. What we've seen, and this varies quite a lot between countries as well, but it is a process. And as you said, it is not a unified voice necessarily from City Hall, but it is about people. They're also individuals. And what we've seen many, many times is that the continuous involvement of, in many cases, the ultimate decision makers is absolutely key. And a few times when things have been more or less ignored, we've been able to run a collaboration again. We've gone a little bit guerrilla a couple of times and simply gone and put things where they were before, and to sort of show people, like, you know what, you're forgetting this bit, you know, the bit you liked over here. And those reminders, those maybe slightly unorthodox ways of doing things, can actually help. But I don't think we've ever actually come across an instance where ultimately the client, whether it is a commercial entity, university or anything, has completely gone, no, that's rubbish, we're not going to do that. Because it's really, really hard when you've been there and you've met all these people face to face. It's really hard to go back in and sort of hide behind your title or your office and go, nope, that's rubbish. So luckily, so far, not too much, not too many problems, but repetition and involvement tends to take care of it.
But can I say something?
Yeah, of course.
Okay. I think the danger is to assume you've got to get agreement from everyone, and invariably there will be disagreements from the business community, so-called, and within the businesses. So it's almost folly to assume that you've got to get agreement before you start doing something. So I think the idea of prototyping, or what I call pilot projects, means that people can say, well, let's try this out and see whether it's going to work on a longer scale. It's only temporary. And the best example that comes to mind is in Melbourne, where there was an issue about pedestrianising the main street. And of course, nobody could agree. So people, community overnight, laid down turf all the way along the main street, which completely transformed everyone's image of the centre of Melbourne and showed what could be done. I think the same could be tried in a more modest scale with car-free days and so on. So, and I use the adage, how do you eat an elephant? Answer a bite at a time, to bring across the point that we need to divide the biggest ideas into bite-sized chunks. One final adage, I think we often look for the big project, but what we want is big ideas and small projects. And too often, like the Millennium Dome, we get big projects with rather small ideas linked to them. So when somebody says what we need is an arena, or what we need is Marks and Spencer's, or whatever other cliche that people come up with, just think, well, let's try something. If we had a market, we could see whether there is any interest in better food or whatever. Or what if we just tried to do something for the children and see if we, and I think that notion of creating fun, which was mentioned earlier, is very crucial. So let us pretend the world is going to go better. And if enough of us did pretend, it actually would get better.
Thank you, Nick. I think just to try to it is 1:53 now, and we're just 7 minutes more of the allocated time. And what I'm going to do in this is that I am trying to take all the kind of the questions and just bunch it together and ask Jaan to just comment on two quick things. Is, you know, there have been mentions about in the chat about prototyping, the scale, and the number and how we can do it. And there is a good point Claire San Martin mentions, and this is great as a challenge for us as academicians. Is there and can there be an academy initiative for experimental prototyping to find temporary and permanent solutions? But the key question that I want to ask you is twofold. First is linking the point what Heather was asking. All the points that you have suggested, is it something that works only internationally, or is it very specific to a particular region? And the second linked question is very much is, in your mind, and this is something, who is your typical commissioning client? Who commissions you? And in that sense, who is your best commissioning client so far? If you want to make some points.
Sure, thank you. I'll actually start with the second one. We've been quite fortunate to work with a lot of organizations, a lot of clients who actually acknowledge that they're a bit stuck. They really don't know what to do next. Sometimes, as you know, one needs to sort of convince the client that that's where they are, or that they need to rethink. For whatever reason, we've often been working with companies and cities that have that need, that urge to do something quite differently. They want clarity, essentially. So essentially, any client that has that is looking for clarity is really the dream commissioning client. The first part about whether it works internationally or sort of more regionally or locally, it sort of works everywhere, but for very different reasons. Singapore has a very strong participatory culture, from very sort of micro level to much broader settings. There is a lot of, you can't go a single day really without being asked about your input on something in your neighborhood or in the nation as such. So there it's actually very easy to do these types of initiatives. In Sweden, where I'm from originally, that is more of a problem. And if there's any connection between, let's say, the city of Stockholm and commercial entities, people instantly start backing off. And they then very often start doing their own sort of grassroots work along the same lines. So it's being very aware of what the differences are essentially culturally around the world. But yeah, it works. And I think a huge part of it is because it lowers the barrier. It makes things easier and it allows people to participate in a way that fits the context, whether that context is a place or if it's a nation.
Can I just make a point? I don't think it's about countries, it's about types of town. You will find in any big country that there are historic towns, or industrial towns, or port towns, or market towns. And if you can find comparisons with the type of place, so Gothenburg, for example, or Göteborg in Sweden, would look to a place like Newcastle or Glasgow, because there are similarities. And it should be comparing itself with them, rather than, say, doing something because Stockholm has done it, and Malmo to Liverpool or whatever. So I think the trick, or and again, the skill of the urbanist is to see what comparisons to make with similar kinds of places, and not be bound by anyone saying, oh, well, we shouldn't look at it because it's a foreign country.
You're absolutely right, Nick, and understanding that aspect, it needs to be part of it. It always needs to be part of the work where one looks, where one finds those connections. Thanks for pointing that out.
And thank you. I think we have literally run out of time, but there was a couple of things I just want to raise. There was a question very early on about the slides. Yeah, it will be, we are trying to share it soon after, but then we have a whole set of information related to the chat. I'm sure it can be downloaded as a file, and we'll share that as well. One last point, I think Hussam wanted to come very, very quickly. Hussam, are you online? Do you want to make a very, very quick point? No, I think we might have left, but...
Hello, yes, hello, you hear me?
Okay, very quickly, Hussam, you wanted to come, so yeah, you have been sending messages, so... Yeah.
I only attended the second half, so apologies, but what I would like to say, what is important, I really like what my colleagues, the last one, mentioned about prototyping, designing with common sense. But what is important, those should lead at the end of the day to proper impact, because there is a danger that they might be for short term, 2 months or 3 months, but they don't lead to a strategic thinking in terms of really claiming streets, activating the vibrancy of the high street. What I am trying to argue, we need a kind of thinking strategically as a transition between 1-2 months, 6 months, and then 18 months. And really thinking about the long term, because really there is a danger. People think, okay, this is only for 2 months and that's it. Thank you.
Very good.
Absolutely spot on.
Yeah, no, very, very good point, Hussam. Does final points, final one sentence from Nick first, and then Jaan.
You want more? Well, the answer is read the article in the next Academy Journal, because it expands on these ideas and refers to previous research.
Excellent. And Jaan, one sentence.
One sentence, it really is about doing it and doing it with great empathy. That brings tremendous answers.
So thank you very much. I know we can't do it in person, but a big, big clapping for everyone, if you can, as a virtual clap. But before everybody goes, I think I would like you to just stay for just 30 seconds. And I'm just passing on the phone to Stephen, and he will take us through presentation, what is happening next. Stephen, over to you. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Deb. Just a quick plug for some upcoming activities. As you'll see in the chat, David Rudlin has invited everyone to nominate in the awards. We're holding this process online, and it will be a best of the best for this year. You can see a little timetable there of upcoming activities linked to the awards, all of which will, well, the award ceremony remains to be seen, but all of which will be online. So you have the opportunity to revisit some of our past assessment visits, some of our past poems, drawings, figure grounds, and decide which places remain the best or have come another distance since we last visited them. Also a quick plug for our next Urbanism Lunch Hour, which will take place not this coming Friday, the one after, which will be chaired by AOU Director Andreas Markides on connected cities and future mobility. Another plug for those in Scotland, we have coffee mornings, which will be running Tuesdays at 11 AM. Contact AOU_Scotland at academyofurbanism.org.uk for more information. And then visit the Academy website for other activities that are coming up. As we mentioned, these talks are open for people to come and speak. So please get in touch with me. I think I've emailed most of you today anyway. But if not, my email address is sg@academyofurbanism.org.uk. And now, if this works, I'd like to leave you with a short video about the Urbanism Awards, which should hopefully back up what I was saying. So, without further ado, look forward to seeing you all the week after next. And here is a bit of a plug about the Urbanism Awards.
Thank you very much. Thank you, everyone.
Taking part in the Urbanism Awards means that you look differently at your own city again. There's a lot of projects you have been working on for years and years already. And so the nomination really made us conscious of the fact that, well, we did quite a special thing and that other people see it.
I think it's always good to be able to test yourself, to think about how we're developing as a city, how we compare to other successful cities across the UK, and to use the process as a learning process, as a chance to celebrate how you've done, but also to think about where you're going for the future.
Something that I think any town on this journey should embrace.
Apologies about the sound there. The film is now on the Academy's website, as is the opportunity to vote. So we look forward to seeing you in a couple of weeks' time. Anything else from you, Deb?
No. So thank you, everyone behind. So it is again to Stephen, Olga, Linda, Delano, and Rachel, and everyone for participating. I think we are here because of all of us, and let's make it happen. the next one in a couple of weeks. But before that, David's plea to just put some nominations for the awards. And thank you. Any comments or anything, how we can improve it, always welcome. Just drop us a line. We are learning as with everyone else. Thank you very much. Thank you. Bye.